Hi everyone. So we're just going to give everyone a chance to jump on. So we'll leave it a minute or two and then we'll start the webinar. Okay, so I can see that a few people have joined. So I think now is as good a time as any to start the webinar.
Okay. Hi everyone. My name is Neil Montgomery and I'm from Catit. I'd like to thank you all for joining and taking the time out of your busy day. So, as I said, my name is Neil Montgomery. I'm a service lifecycle consultant at Catit. I'll give you a little bit of my background. So, I've been with Catit for 5 years now. I've been in various different service roles in that time with various different customers. And today I want to talk a little bit about service strategy and its importance to the future of mobility. So just before I do that, I want to give you a bit of an overview of Catit. So Catit is a privately held group with over 600 employees. Our headquarters is in Singapore, and we have over 125 international awards. We're specialists in Industry 4.0 and more specifically in design, simulation, manufacturing, service lifecycle management, product lifecycle management, technical publications, and service consulting. So we operate in numerous industries. Those are aerospace, automotive, industrial equipment, heavy machinery, medical, marine, and electric and autonomous vehicles, as well as agriculture. So that's just a bit of an overview of who Catit are and the industries that we work in. So what I want to cover today, as I mentioned, is the future of mobility and service strategy within that. So if we start off with mobility, really, mobility hasn't really changed very much in the last 120 years or so. It's largely, the manufacture of internal combustion engine vehicles, which are sold and serviced by dealers for customers. So what's happened in the last 5 years or so is that there's a massive change in demand. And as a result, we have sort of a wave of OEMs and new startup companies who are trying to move into the EV and autonomous market. And despite that influx of companies responding to the changes in the mobility sector, there's not really enough demand for all of them to be successful. So really, for these companies to survive and thrive, they have to start thinking about how they're going to adapt to the changes in the most efficient way possible. And one of the most sort of straightforward ways of doing that is to have a solid service strategy in place. Because maintenance becomes more and more important as we move into this new era of mobility. So what we'll do is we'll look at what service strategy is. So traditionally, service strategy within OEMs, what they would do is they define sort of what the intervals of service would be, what the serviceable parts are, and as well as that, they kind of outline any special tools that were needed as well. but they provide their dealers with the facilities to react to broken down vehicles, etc. But ultimately, their focus at that time is to reduce the amount of maintenance cost for the duration of the vehicle's warranty period, because it's a direct cost to them. Then the dealer, they obviously carry out the scheduled maintenance and orchestrate reactive repairs. But because dealers have no prior knowledge of what fault is going to be on the vehicle, so when they're carrying out a reactive repair, it leads to a lot of downtime, which also leads to unhappy customers. So that approach, that traditional approach, isn't really relevant as we move into mobility as a service going forward. So what we want to do is look at what's changed in the mobility sector, what is going to change over the next couple of years. So if we start to look at the trends, the sort of emerging trends in mobility at the moment, and what's happened is society's perception of mobility is changing, and there's 4 common causes for that. So environmental awareness is number one. You know, there's an ever-increasing awareness around the effect of mobility on climate change. Convenience. So society is used to having everything at their fingertips now. So mobility is no exception. So, you know, if I can ask someone else to drive for me, or someone else can drive for me, then that's brilliant. I'll do that. And then safety is a huge factor in this. So every day on the UK roads, 5 people die in road traffic accidents, and a study found that 94% of those accidents were caused by human error. So that sort of promotes the potential benefits of autonomous vehicles. And then finally, cost. So technology has become and is becoming more and more expensive. So maintaining that technology and buying new vehicles is becoming more and more expensive. So these are really the 4 main drivers in the change in perception. So what we'll do now is look at how industry and OEMs are reacting to that change. So number one is vehicle subscriptions. People can rent vehicles for, you know, a day or a week or a month for a flat fee, and it means they don't have to invest their money in buying a vehicle. We have electrification. So obviously governments are incentivizing both OEMs and consumers to go electric as a way of reducing their CO2 output targets. Autonomous driving is another major thing. There's a huge amount of investment, over $200 billion globally, and that's set to increase as well, particularly for mobility within cities. And also there's a massive issue with staff shortages. So if we can get mobility working without the need for drivers, then that's great as well. Mobility as a service, again, is a bit like your Uber, or what Uber are doing, but again, autonomous driving is making that even more convenient. You know, people can order their autonomous vehicle to come and collect them and then drop them off, and that's that. And then finally, vehicle to everything, which is connecting the vehicle to all of the surrounding equipment and technology to give it better visibility of potential hazards or risks around it, to make the autonomous driving even better. So those are the ways that industry is kind of adapting to this change in mobility trend. So what we need to then look forward to is how do we change service strategy to match those trends? So what does service strategy look like in the future? Right, so in order to deal with those mobility trends mentioned in the previous slide, service strategy should be adapted, and we'll go through 4 or 5 points of what is going to change. So with mobility as a service and vehicle subscriptions, OEMs and dealers are going to need to manage vehicles as a fleet, because each of these vehicles or assets are going to experience much more wear and tear, as they don't have an owner, or there's not one singular person who's looking after them or spotting potential issues. So they need to have some sort of fleet management in place. Some OEMs want to own the assets and run them as a run and operate them, basically as a route to revenue. So they need to be more and more focused on the maintenance of the vehicle throughout its whole life cycle, rather than previously they were sort of focused on the warranty period. But now, if they're going to be responsible for that vehicle for its whole life, maintenance is key, because it's their asset at the end of the day. And then, as we mentioned earlier, these vehicles have so much technology in them, and so much complex technology, that they need to be able to start managing how they maintain that technology, so they don't have to keep replacing it. Parts are more and more expensive. And then finally, with autonomous vehicles, there's going to be a lot of very, very strict guidelines around maintenance for those, just because of the potential risks of them hurting many people out in the field. And there's not really one person who's completely in charge of that vehicle. So yeah, they're going to have very strict guidelines around maintenance. What do OEMs need to change? So basically, to cope with service strategy, the goal for OEM should be to maximize uptime, obviously to increase revenue. They need to maintain these complex systems, and they need to minimize customer dissatisfaction, because once you take mobility out of the hands of someone who used to own it, and you make it a service, people expect much higher standards for a service, rather than driving themselves around the city. So minimizing customer dissatisfaction is going to be the biggest challenge in that sort of mobility sector. Now, how do OEMs then adapt their service strategy to make this all work? So I think the first point is the use of the Internet of Things, or IoT as we call it. And that sort of facilitates remote condition monitoring. So you can see a problem starting to emerge before it turns into a real fault, or it leaves someone stranded. That's with the use of monitoring sensors on the vehicle to predict something going wrong. The second key part here is fleet operations. So fleet operations is going to be planning and scheduling maintenance to the vehicles, sort of in the most efficient manner to keep them operating for as long as possible. I think we're going to see a bit of a rise in the amount of mobile response units which are attending autonomous breakdowns, because, as I said earlier, there's not one person who's responsible for one vehicle anymore. So it's going to be more like, we need a unit that can get to a customer as soon as possible, make sure they're okay, and then sort of start work on the vehicle, or get the vehicle back to a workshop. So and then finally, and almost most importantly, is effective parts and logistics planning. So organizing your service bill of materials, releasing parts for service, so that your fleet operation system can plan the maintenance, and the parts are always available for technicians to fit. So I think those four pieces of the puzzle, if you like, are vitally important, and it's all sort of centrally managed by the fleet operations system. And I think that's the direction service strategy is going in. So if we talk about the development of service strategy, basically what traditionally happens is service is an afterthought. You usually have engineering and manufacturing, and people forget about service. But as we sort of said earlier, maintenance of the vehicles is now becoming more and more important, especially when OEMs actually own them and run them as a service or a route to revenue. So it is vitally important that service are involved in the product lifecycle right from the very, very start, or right from inception. And the reason basically the reason for that is if service can be involved right from the start, then all of the business processes will involve service, and ultimately you'll have a service strategy that works in all aspects of the product lifecycle. So yeah, these are what you can see on the screen are really the main stepping stones to developing a good service strategy. Obviously, it's not ideal, and there will be companies who have already had a product idea, started developing it, and then think about service. And that it's not ideal, but it can be done. But ideally, we would be in at the very start of the product life cycle. So, and then I guess one of the last important parts about service strategy is, how do we measure its performance? So ultimately there are four core parts to measuring service strategy performance. We've got the product itself, the fleet operations system, service operations team, the people actually on the ground performing the work, and then the processes that those people follow. And all of that will kind of equal how much of your fleet are available versus unavailable. And the success of those four core pieces is determined by the inputs, which are also shown on the screen. And I think it's an iterative process. So you don't just say, here's my service strategy and that's it, fixed for the life cycle of the vehicle. You have to be willing to adapt and change things in order to get it right for your product. So that's measuring our service strategy performance. Now, Catit, what we do in Catit essentially is we take an end-to-end approach. So we start off with our service strategy, how we're planning to maintain the vehicle, set out that plan. Then we look at service engineering assessments. So as the design matures, we assess the design and try and point out any areas that could be made more efficient in the design for service. Basically what we're trying to do is design service into the vehicle to save money over its life cycle. We then develop software solutions, and implement them to allow companies to have a system that works for the end users, really the technicians who are performing the work. So we'll design a solution that's sort of all-encompassing for the service team. We obviously develop the content, we author the content, and we provide training to the end users as well, and then the data analytics and monitoring of how that content is being used and where it needs to be improved. So that's our end-to-end approach for service, if you like. But the key part here is that it starts with a strategy, so you know the direction that you want to go in. So if I just do a bit of a brief summary of what we've talked about, and there's 5 takeaway points before we get on to the questions and answers. So number 1, obviously mobility is changing, and there's no denying that, and it's going to keep changing. Service strategy must change to allow OEMs to stay competitive. So going back to the point at the start is, there is a complete change in demand for mobility, and if you continue to service the vehicles in the way that we would have traditionally, OEMs won't be able to stay competitive going forward. Technology and innovation will enable service to stay up to date. So using things like IoT, telemetry, fleet operation systems is the key to moving forward. And then for a product to be successful, service needs to be considered throughout every stage of development, as we talked about with the stepping stones. So I think it is really, really key for a business to develop a good service strategy that service is considered at all stages. And then strategy should always be monitored and adjusted to optimize the operations. So those are the 5 key takeaway points, I guess, for you guys to go and think about. I suppose if anyone has any questions, it would be really useful to kick off.
Okay, so I see that we've had a few questions come in already. So the first question is, when is the best time to develop a service strategy?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think I kind of covered it in the slides, but essentially the best time is always at the start or at product initiation. So once there's an idea for a new product, or when a new product's being developed, I think, you know, starting your strategy there, understanding what the objective of the business is and what they want to achieve. So it's right from the start. Obviously, it can be done at any time in the life cycle, but the best time is always at the start of the product life cycle.
Okay, another question. Whilst you talk about automotive, how does this apply to other industries which will fit into the mobility space?
Sorry, could you repeat that, Alison? I couldn't hear it.
Sorry, whilst you talk about automotive, does this apply to any other industries which fit into the mobility space?
Yeah, absolutely. It's all industries. So obviously I talked a lot about autonomous vehicles and electrification, which we're seeing mostly in automotive at the moment, but also with, in agriculture, things are moving into the autonomous space and the electrification space. Same with aerospace as well. So yeah, all industries need to consider their service strategies going forward, because it seems that the paradigm shift is towards subscriptions and mobility as a service, rather than traditionally someone going and buying an asset and owning it after its warranty period. It's now it seems to be that OEMs are at least leasing them, if not owning them and operating them as well. So yeah, all industries.
Okay, and another question, how will companies manage the maintenance of autonomous vehicles?
Yeah, so I think there's 2 key aspects to maintaining autonomous vehicles. Number 1 is a fleet operations system. So, usually when a company develops an autonomous vehicle, they're developing a number of them, and being able to see the fleet as a whole and plan its maintenance, so that it's not all, if you release 100 vehicles to work, that you don't have to service them all after 1 year. You want to plan your maintenance of those vehicles so that it's even. That's the first part, and the second part is using the Internet of Things, or remote condition monitoring, to basically understand what's going on with that vehicle, and if there is a fault, or it's looking like there might be a fault, then you can bring it in as quickly as you can, get it serviced, get it maintained, and back out in the field so it can earn money again. I think one of the biggest downfalls to both consumers and OEMs at the moment is reactive repair, essentially. So it comes in, you first have to diagnose the fault, then you have to order the parts, and then you're waiting. And obviously time is money, particularly in when you're trying to operate a vehicle as a route to revenue rather than it just being a customer vehicle.
Okay, thank you. Another question is, what are the key challenges in developing a strategy with a company that have already begun their journey?
I guess the biggest challenge is that we would go into a company that has already set out, already started some business processes that service haven't been considered for. So, for example, they've already set out a basic design of their vehicle, and if service hasn't been considered at that point, there may be there may be parts which are particularly hard to remove, or hard to access, or it doesn't suit a service schedule. So what ultimately happens is it takes longer than it should to maintain that part on the vehicle, and therefore costs either the consumer or the OEM a lot more money. I think it'll always affect the OEM, particularly in the warranty period, because they're going to be paying for the labor to remove a part that could take 2 hours rather than 10 minutes. And what tends to happen, or what we often see, is that a vehicle is different aspects of the vehicle are designed in isolation, and then when it's all packaged together, there's conflicts in the design, and that, as I say, just costs the OEM quite a bit of money, where it doesn't need to. With a bit of planning, if service was involved at the start. The other thing, I guess, is parts. So parts releasing and the SBOM. If we don't release parts, and if service aren't involved in parts releasing, then what tends to happen is assemblies are ordered for manufacture, and it's great that it's all one assembly and you can just bolt it onto the vehicle. But if a small part within that assembly breaks and there's no part, if the part hasn't been released on its own, it doesn't have its own part number, then you have to order that whole assembly in service, which either costs the OEM a lot in warranty, or costs the customer a lot, because the vehicle's out of warranty, and that's a huge issue. So those are just some examples of service not being involved at the right time. But yeah, those are some of the challenges.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. Final question: how much can Catit support in the development of a new service strategy?
Massively so. So we would quite often go into a customer right at the beginning and support them right all the way up, and sometimes after the product's been released. So right at the start, a customer would come to us and say, this is what we're planning to build, this is the sort of parameters that it's going to operate in, and we would go and completely make a bespoke service strategy for them, and work with them through the design and development phase of the product, and then after, to try and help them optimize that service strategy. So yeah, we can be as involved as possible is best, but we can also do some consulting just to help them along the way. I think one of our key benefits is that we're quite flexible in how we approach and help customers with their service strategy. So
great, thank you. So I think we'll end the webinar here. Thank you for attending, everyone that did attend.
Thank you. Yeah, it was great. If you have any questions, feel free to email me, and I can get those answered for you as well.